The anxious person sometimes can seem like the very nice person, and it can be very easy to identify the more anxious partner as the victim. But I think Annie was really kind of showing that this is the other side of anxious attachment. Hi, I'm Jody, a relationship and sex therapist based in Southern California, and today we're continuing our Love is Blind series, and we're going to be talking about Annie and Nick. They were a little bit of a hot mess, and definitely think it was best that that relationship did not work out. There was already quite significant issues from the beginning, conflict that was escalating, lack of boundaries. Understandably, we all have wounds, but it was just kind of not sad that that one didn't work out. So let's kind of break it down. We have the pods, we have the retreat, we've got the after pods. Let's kind of start with Nick. Nick seemed like a really nice guy. You know, he's from like his traditional Midwestern upbringing, understandably. You know, you got to present well, you got to be friendly, but there was something that seemed to kind of get picked up on. I was definitely picking up on it. People on the show were definitely picking up on it. There was a little bit of like a fakeness or some kind of, you know, behind a mask that kind of felt like, even though he's saying the right things, there's something that feels kind of off right now. You definitely started to see that in the pods where like he seemed like this really caring, committed person. And then you're like, wait, hold up. Did he just say the same thing to two people? Wait, how did you go from Kate to Annie? What just happened here? And yes, you did say the same thing to both of them. What's going on right now? You already kind of started to feel that. And then, like, I remember I mentioned, like, Joe was kind of like making fun of him a little bit. You notice that other people were kind of noticing it as well. And they start to kind of feel a little bit sus around those kind of people. And again, it doesn't mean they're not nice people. When you don't really know what's going on with them, or if you can really authentically connect with them, you know, your walls start to kind of go up. You know, I have a couple different reasons on why that might be. One, he was very honest that he was brought up in faith, and not that that is an automatic thing, but I have met a lot of people who, when they grow up in faith that is very structured, they kind of sometimes can feel as if they're running their life through a template. And that sometimes can make people feel uncomfortable because they're like, am I really knowing you, or are you kind of just this drone that got kind of spit out? And again, that does not mean that's the case for everybody, but sometimes that can be an outcome when you're coming from this background that really tells you who to be, how to be. Maybe that's not even all religion, maybe that's other components of like what's the norm and how you're expected to act in your community, versus like adding in like who your natural self is. Like, how do you sprinkle that in there that's a way that's still acceptable maybe, but makes you feel a little bit more authentic. There was also the comments around Nick of people thinking that maybe he was gay. Again, I can't speak on that because I don't know Nick. I don't know if he's gay. I don't know what the future holds. I could see that maybe he's a little bit more in touch with like less traditional masculine features. He's a jewelry watch dealer, maybe like how he's talking. I can understand why people were saying it. Again, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's the case. There's potential that maybe at some level that will come out in the future. Who knows? But again, I can kind of only go off of that. But I know I could see how it could happen if that was a part of him or his identity. Maybe he wasn't aware of it because religion, things like that are not always the most accepting of these things. So we've kind of learned to bury it. I don't know if he really is or not. He's kind of the only one that would know, but I guess we'll see what the future holds. Then we had Annie. Seemed like a very nice person, goofy, has her own hair salon. But I think one of the things that really stuck out for me about Annie is kind of a personification of anxious attachment, and not in the good way. So I think sometimes when someone is anxious, right, you see a relationship, and the anxious person sometimes can seem like the very nice person. I love you. You know, they'll say a lot of things like that. They'll be very nice. Why are you hurting me? And it can be very easy to identify the more anxious partner as the victim. But I think Annie was really kind of showing that this is the other side of anxious attachment. The constant seeking of affirmation. I kind of use the example of a person like that kind of, it can feel like you're always trying to fill their cup, but it's never full enough because there's a hole in the bottom of it. But the partner is the one that's responsible, continuing to try to fill that cup, but it's a losing battle. If I don't find value in myself and I'm getting all of my validation and self-worth externally, that's not going to work. I have to know my own value, and I have to find people that align with my own reflection of my value. Sure, I want people to push me or reflect things and help build my insight. If you have anxious attachment, oftentimes you're going to find people that make you feel less than. But then there's also this component of I already feel less than, so I'm going to project that onto you, and nothing you're going to do is enough. So that definitely was happening. And then also the other part of that is then when I need that affirmation and I'm not getting it, I'm going to try to get it. I'm trying to force it, or I'm going to act out when I don't get it. So that's kind of where you saw, especially during the breakup, where Annie was like, watch me, or would make these comments like, you don't love me, like, why don't you love me as much as I love you? And it's like, what? Does it have to look exactly the same? Where's the checklist of exactly how Nick has to show you that he loves you? Because I actually thought that, yes, Nick was a little bit sus in how he kind of was saying he loved two people and then he went with Annie, sure. But I feel like once he kind of locked in on Annie, I actually felt like he was trying, he was affectionate, and he wasn't this guy that like never expressed his feelings. So I didn't really feel like that was fair for Annie to say. But, you know, maybe she is picking up on like that. It feels fake, feels inauthentic. Sure. And then that's going to kind of drive an anxious person to start cycling. That's when, you know, escalation is going to start happening, right? And then the other person might try to make them happy or might start to shut down, which I think Nick eventually did, saying, I'm not going to do this. I don't feel comfortable. I don't want to do this at all. You know, I do give Nick credit for cutting that because it just did not seem like it was going to be something that was going to work out well for them. I wouldn't be surprised if it just continued to escalate. And I think he did need to set boundaries with Annie. Okay, sure, I want to hear what makes you feel unsafe or not heard by me, but the way that she's going about it is a big part of the problem. You can't force anybody to express it in a certain way. All you can do is request. You need to respect when somebody says no. If somebody says, I don't want to be in a relationship with you, you have to accept that. You can't try to force them into doing it. You had in the pods, you had Annie and Brendan. You know, she was trying to say, Brendan didn't tell me that he cared about me until it was too late. Sure, I totally understand that, but I'm also not surprised that she's going to kind of go after maybe Nick, who eventually she kind of felt like she wasn't feeling affirmed. So I think that's, you know, kind of one of the catch-22s of like, you're saying you're not going for the person that didn't give you affirmation, but then you're not happy with the person that's giving you affirmation, or again, you're going to find somebody where it feels inauthentic. That was kind of a sad thing that happened. And then you had Nick and Kate. Kate was the other person that Nick was kind of saying the same thing to Annie and actually was preferring Kate at the beginning, and then all of a sudden it switched to Annie. Who knows? They had a conversation at one of the parties where everybody was there afterwards. I do give him credit for having that conversation and being able to be mature enough to have a conversation, not just avoid each other. He was attempting to take responsibility. I don't know if he fully ever took responsibility, and like, or maybe like watching the show back might be really interesting for him. You kind of did say the same thing to both of them, and I understand why they're hurt and confused. So he did attempt to take some of that, but I think looking into like this inauthenticity component for him is going to be really important. I think that's kind of why she wasn't really fully accepting it. She's like, I appreciate you saying it, but it's not really landing. It's feeling performative for me. We're just going to kind of just cut it there and go our own ways. Annie and Nick, again, happy they didn't work out. That was a little bit of a hot mess. I'll probably do a quick video about the reunion and the hot mess that was. And that'll be the end of the series. Thanks for watching.